Hello and welcome to this version of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host, today with my assistant Toto. I'm thinking of this as take two of the Joyful Friar podcast because yesterday I recorded the episode that I'm re-recording today. This is part two of a trilogy. Last week's show was an introduction to B, the big band singer who took matters into her own hands. She died by suicide. So I told the story in basic form last week. And then in this show, I want to go into what we call compassionate response, how this story has been received by people who've listened to it or heard it. And the impact that it's had along the way, and my attempt to respond to people who have been through suffering because of either their own struggles or the death of a loved one by suicide. But yesterday, I was doing this in my house, and I just thought I had recorded a great show. When I got to the end of it, I learned later that the internet had collapsed while I was doing it, and I was talking to myself. It's funny, I would have thought the whole thing would go dark, but there was no indication to me that I had lost the internet, but I had, and I lost the content of the show. So I decided to come over here to my friend Richard's house where Toto lives, because I could, again, get the internet and record this show for you. So that's that. So just to recap, B came in a dream. It was an unusual dream in that it was two somewhat separate stories that were woven together in one dream story. You waving at the people? Yeah. Okay. Hello, Toto. Yeah. Hello. These two stories were woven together, and they both felt like they were decades ago. There was the landscape of buildings that were from the late 1800s that were now in disrepair. It turned out that both of the stories really were taking place in the late 30s or early 40s, somewhere along in there. But in each case, one was a man, one was a woman who took their own lives. You can find out, you can read those in detail in Afterlife Interrupted, book 2, near the back, near the end. But anyway, B was a young woman, about 18, just out of high school, who had a great singing voice, and she was discovered, and so somebody was going to give her big break, and she was employed by a band during the big band era, when it was common for an ensemble of men, with a lot of them playing clarinets or other kind of woodwinds, and a female lead singer. Well, wherever she was from, somewhere in the Midwest, their initial engagements were local, or at least not very far away, maybe within a day's drive. Then they began to travel a little further away from her home. She was housed in a hotel room in the same hotel with her male colleagues, but she discovered that they kept a key to her room. And she said, I had to fight off my bosses in my own room and in my own bed. She was sexually assaulted by the people she worked with. She didn't think of it as rape, because in her mind, the definition of rape was being accosted by a stranger on the street, something like that. And the fact that it happened repeatedly, she said she just discovered that if she just pretended it wasn't happening, let them do what they wanted to do, it'd be over. They would leave. She could clean herself up, go to sleep, and be ready for work the next day. So that's in a nutshell most of her story. The next part of it was that she became pregnant, and she had no idea who the father was. She felt that the clock was ticking. And do you want to get down, bud? You want to get down? Okay, he's gonna help from over here on the bed, I guess. Um, we She told us that she felt she had to act quickly. She didn't want to go back to her family, her parents, pregnant, and she just said, I took matters into my own hands. That included uh, using a small firearm in a way that was to the torso. She said, I wanted to see if I could do it without making it blatantly obvious that it was a suicide. Men often cover for each other. Maybe they would create some sort of story about the gun going off accidentally or while she was cleaning it or something like that. And she said that's in fact what did happen. So it's a sad story. Nevertheless, when these people come to me, whether it's suicide or car crashes or any other kind of death, most of which are sudden and violent, they only come and get in my line and into my dreamscape and seek the help of my prayer partners and I when they've been through a therapeutic process that's brought them to something of a finish line. We think of ourselves as the discharge staff at a medical center. You don't need to stay in a hospital. You stay there as long as you need to in order to heal, and then you're released. Well, we're a part of a release that moves from level to level in the afterlife, from this therapeutic level to something more adventurous, happy, maybe more attuned to, if you do think of the joys of heaven, um, you might not have been ready for them right after your violent sudden death. You might have needed a chance to regroup, heal some, and then be in some sort of position to welcome new adventures or even to choose among options. So that's the story of B. So today we're looking at her story in terms of what I call compassionate response. Compassion just means to suffer with. And if you've ever been in a moment of suffering in your life, you might have found that the presence of someone who loved you, they might not have been able to take your pain away, but they could share it or be with you in it somehow, just to be present, maybe not to fix things, but just to be present, to be with. That's the definition of compassion. So this story has been in the public for several years now, and one consequence of that is people read or listen to it and then contact me through my website and have questions. So I decided in this particular podcast that I want to speak to two specific audiences. First of all, any of you who are in such pain that taking your own life sometimes seems an attractive option. This is not a suicide hotline, and I'm not exactly doing that kind of counsel, but you might be listening to this for that reason or with that in mind. And so I thought I'd speak to any in the audience for whom that might be true. The second, I think, far larger group is the number of people who've contacted me who have loved someone who did take their own life. Just think of the math of it. For every person who does take their own life, there's a network of people who were their relatives, friends, neighbors, associates, co-workers. Suicide, even if a person feels like they're very isolated and all alone in the world, we're really not. And sometimes after a person has taken their life, there's a lot of painful fallout in lots of different directions. Some of those people find their way to me and ask me questions, and sometimes I end up on the phone helping people imagine things differently, or sometimes somehow bring some sort of help to them while they're grieving a loved one. So I'm going to do that in those two ways. So first of all, for any of you who are in such pain that suicide even seems like a possibility, I would say, first of all, I'm praying for you. And I believe that matters. I believe prayer is an energy that moves from person to person, heart to heart. And I believe that energetic prayer can create a resource, can boost, um, lift up another. So anyway, and I believe the Holy Spirit, God, however it all works, connects us all. I believe God is everywhere, and in you and I might be in different places, but I believe prayer is a way that we can intentionally link up. So I have been praying for you in advance of doing this show. There's that old truism you might have heard about suicide being a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Well, I think that's a maxim because there's truth in it. On the other hand, for people who are have chronically painful life circumstances, sometimes it doesn't feel like a a temporary problem. Sometimes it feels like there's just no way out. That was the way Dee felt, except for the one option that she did choose. Uh, so, but one of the things I've seen in all of the different uh, work that my prayer partners and I have been asked to do with people who died traumatically, suicide, or any other way, is that the ones that seem to do the best in moving from here to there, from now to later, is they have a gift for staying in the present moment, trying not to um, load up their imagination with um, constant remembrances of past trauma, past hurts, continuing to ruminate on them, bring them into the present, allow your present to be saddened because of what happened to you before. Um, Trying to stop that kind of thinking. Another one would be fleeing into the future and seeing it as only dark and hopeless, that I don't see a path forward that I think is positive or good. I want it all to stop. Well, I would encourage you to do the best you can to stay in the present moment. Try to find someone to be in it with you, a compassionate person who is near you, not just some guy on the internet, but somebody near you who might be able to enter into your struggle and be a part of helping you out of it. Another thing is simply trying to, um, especially in the mornings when the day is starting, sit still and think of uh, good things. But priests like me would call them blessings. I'm grateful that my body is free of pain. Mostly, I've been having some lower back problems, but for a 67 going on 68-year-old guy, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful to live in a place where there's peace. When you turn on the news, there's so many people living in war, whatever. I'm grateful just that I'm living in a place where there's peace. I'm grateful for my dog friend over here next to me on the bed. I'm grateful for the change of weather because I'm living in Tucson where October and November are some, I think, the best times of the year. Some things like that. I've moved through dark periods of my own life, and I've done that discipline during those times. It's possible. So those are a couple of things that I would suggest. And and if it's at all possible, please don't isolate. That thought that says nobody loves me, I'm all alone in the world. If you let that grow and take over, it will. Uh, please don't stay alone in your suffering. Find help. It's nearby. Um, my I want to tell this story about my acquaintance with suicide at all as a little person. I never heard of it until one day, one evening, I was watching The Wizard of Oz with a whole house full of friends because in the 60s, that's the way it was. There were no tapes or uh, streaming anything. You watched something on television that only came on once a year. You went to the bathroom during the commercials or you'd miss something. We were a house full of young kids and parents watching The Wizard of Oz, and it was in 1962 or three. I know that because that year on CBS, Judy Garland had her own variety show. By that time, she was a woman in her early 40s. She'd been through a world of hurt by that time in her own personal life. lots of drug abuse and divorces and all kind of pain. But she had a show, a variety show for 1 year. Unfortunately for her and the people in that show, it was put on against Bonanza, which was this cowboy western that was the #1 rated show on television at the time. So they were up against the very hardest competition. The show only lasted a year. And I didn't watch it because we were watching Bonanza, but I saw the commercials. I knew there was a Judy Garland show. So I knew that she wasn't the little girl in the movie anymore. She had grown up and was an old lady at, early 40s to a 7-year-old. But here's the thing. We were watching The Wizard of Oz, and this young friend named Mark said of Judy Garland, she tried to kill herself. Well, I just went quiet because I was in a room full of kids and I wasn't going to give away that I'd never heard of this, but I had never heard of it. I didn't know there was such a thing as suicide. And within a few hours, I was on my way to bed and saying my night prayers. And I was lying in my bed thinking, the world isn't as safe as I thought it was. I had grown up in a safe, loving household. I had learned that there are armies and police and firemen, people that keep us safe from somebody that would try to harm us. But there aren't enough armies and police or anybody else to keep every last one of us from hurting ourselves if we chose to do it. I thought, wow, the kitchen has knives in it. In the under the sink, there's those cleaning fluids with warnings things on them. In the medicine cabinets, there are pills that you could take. That we were a family that had guns. My dad was a hunter. There were guns in the house. I just thought, wow, the world is nowhere near as safe as I thought it was. But in my little 7-year-old mind, or whatever it was, 6 or 7, I thought, well, that must be very, very rare. And I thought, Judy Garland, wow, she looks like such a happy person in the movie, but she tried to kill herself. She must be the world's most unhappy person. That's the way I framed it as a little kid. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do to help the world's most unhappy person? I have to start praying for Judy Garland. So I did. So I had little categories of prayer by that time, prayers of gratitude, or I was already praying for the souls in purgatory. I'd read the obituary pages and pray for the people in them. And, I'd pray for my future and pray for all kind of different things. Well, I just added a category for praying for Judy Garland as the world's most unhappy person who tried to kill herself. And I did that for years. It was just my practice. Later, years later, decades later, I got interested in writing my first book, and Toto 2, The Wizard of Oz as a Spiritual Adventure. And at that time, I started praying to L. Frank Baum, the author of The Wizard of Oz, because I was going to be using his material and recrafting it. So I started speaking to him in the Holy Spirit in prayer. I was grateful for the craft of that 1938 movie that's been seen by more people than have ever seen any movie ever. And I think of myself as an artistic, creative person. So I prayed for all of those artists that put that whole film together, not just the headliners, the actors and actresses that get, billing on a poster. I prayed in the manner of the way that Jesus taught us. The kingdom of God is made from the bottom up, that the last shall be first, the first last. So I prayed for everyone to ever swept a studio floor or sewed a button on a costume. Anybody that had anything to do with creating this work of art that I so enjoyed, The Wizard of Oz, the film, the MGM film. I've had that practice, and in the story of Bee, if you take the time to read it in book 2, when it's time for her to cross, she explains that she was in this industry, this entertainment industry that so routinely treated women so badly. It turned out that Margaret Hamilton showed up to be the 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 person who accompanied B from the level she was at to the next level that was possible for her. If you take the time to read the story, that when it was time to do that, they went on a girl date that two women might have done in the early 40s, getting dressed up. It's funny the way that Bee talked about it. She said, everything here fits. It's always in your size, it's in your color, and it doesn't cost anything. And then she had some concern about, but what if I look good and my looks attract negative attention from men? Well, Margaret Hamilton said that doesn't happen here. Nobody treats each other that way. Um, Margaret added the fact that she was surrounded during those years in the 30s and 40s by young, attractive women, and that she was not so attractive. She was thought castable as the Wicked Witch. And then after that role, which was the biggest of her career, as it turned out, many of her other roles are as household servants, maids of one kind or another. If you watch old movies, you'll sometimes see her show up. I remember when I was probably in my teens, she was a pitch woman for Maxwell House Coffee. She was this character in some sort of country store, and everybody that walked in was confused about what kind of coffee they ought to buy. And she was there to tell them that this one was good to the last drop. Well, anyhow, I had included Margaret Hamilton in my prayers for years and years, and lo and behold, she was the one to help B move along. So enough of that. I'm going to turn my attention to survivors of suicide and a few suggestions that maybe you'll find helpful. If in fact you've looked for somebody like me, or you're on the internet looking at afterlife related content, I would suggest that you seek out some grief support in an organized way if you haven't done that already. Suicide has been on the rise in recent years in the United States, where I live, and consequent to that, there are specific grief support groups in local community centers, churches, perhaps nonprofits. If you look for grief support near me, the way that you might, Mexican restaurant near me on your phone, if you type in grief support near me, I'll bet you find some options right away. And even if that doesn't end up being something that you do for a long time, maybe it's helpful, or just the right thing happens, and then maybe you end up being the answer to someone else's prayer. There's a lot of power in people who suffer the same issue, healing one another, being wounded healers. The whole Alcoholics Anonymous, nearly 100 years of success is one wounded person helping heal another. So I would certainly say try that, and try not to be too picky. Sometimes I've seen that where, and even when I sought counseling in my own life, I learned early on to just pray to be guided to the right place and then go there. And then once there, see if it felt like a place where I might open my heart and be receptive to a deeper healing. And then if that wasn't the right place, try it the next one, not to put all your eggs in one basket and insist that on the first try, I must find exactly what it is I need. So grief support groups, I'd recommend that. And then in one's own thinking, and I mentioned AA already, there's a little phrase that you hear around AA a fair amount called stinking thinking. It's a little phrase that, unpacked, points to the truth that a lot of times emotions follow thoughts. We have a stinking thought like nobody loves me, and that thought can go unchallenged and be it can assert itself as the unassailable truth that nobody loves me and it's just a rule of the universe. And then if you allow that thought to stay, it really becomes something like a weed that grows all over the place, or some other sort of unwanted metaphor where before you know it, that thought um, creates a whole cascade of negative emotions and maybe poor choices that follow that and so on. I think it's important to look for the truth and don't believe that just because you form some idea related to the death of a loved one by suicide, like it's all my fault. Um, Push back, challenge. The wound of being the survivor of a loved one who took their life, it can have dirt in it. Sometimes the healing that you hope would happen after the onset of a deep grief, you expect that it's going to be difficult and that's going to take time, but sometimes it takes more time than necessary because of what I call dirt in the wound. Uh, Particularly for people that have lost a loved one to suicide, it can be very easy to say, if only I had done or said this or that, or had I not done this or that, he or she would still be alive. I'm somehow responsible for the suicide of my loved one. Another variant of that is I should have known, I should have seen the signs. There can be a lot of retrospective sleuthing and saying, now I see when he or she did that thing or said that thing or didn't show up to this, I should have known. Well, man, what a burden to take the present moment and load it up with should haves like that. Um, One good way to do that, I would recommend this with the help of a counselor, some compassionate listener, and someone who is not clouded by that same death as you might be, is to write stuff down. Uh, if you're blaming yourself for the death of another by suicide, or if you're raging at them because of the pain that they've caused you and so on, write stuff down, and then look away from it, come back to it, and say, is it true? Um, or, and very often there'll be a kernel of truth behind some negative thought or an emotion that flows from it, but it gets exaggerated and blown out of all proportion. So anyway, I hope you get my point. Check to see that the wound that you're dealing with of survivor guilt or whatever after the death of a loved one by suicide, check to see if there's dirt in the wound. It's bad enough to that have to suffer it, but if it festers and so on, I just don't want that for you. So I would offer that. One thing I would suggest is to trust that everyone who ever dies lives after they die. They just do. It's a it's not just because I'm a Catholic priest that I say that. I just think it's a universal law. One way to express it is in physics, the idea that in physics that energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transferred. You and I are energetic beings living in these bodies. When this body dies, there's still an energy being me that will live outside of this body in some other form. I deal with that all the time. So remember that your loved one who has died is alive in a different way. One thing that I think it's important to point out is that some people have been taught by religious systems that suicide is a serious sin, and the loved one who has died by suicide has now done something to compound their troubles. Maybe they're sent to hell because they killed their body, they committed murder against themselves, and God is mad at them, and so on. Well, I can speak from my experience as a Catholic kid growing up that in the early 60s and through the 60s, maybe into the 70s, uh, it was normative, at least in the United States, that people who died by suicide were not allowed to have a Catholic burial mass, and they couldn't be buried in a Catholic cemetery. That was the law. Well, this was an example of something that changed from the grassroots level, from the ground up. People can look at the Catholic Church as this monolith, this huge multinational institution that's very top heavy, the Vatican and a Pope telling everybody how things are. And there's truth in that. But here was a case where local churches, local people, local pastors looked at this practice and said, this is the exact opposite of what we ought to be doing. Our families who are dealing with the loss by suicide of a loved one, they're the ones that need the embrace of the church community and its rituals, its sacraments. They're the ones that need it the most. Why in the world would we turn them away and compound their sorrows? So fortunately, that did change from the ground up. And I was ordained in 1985 at the age of 29. And within, I think it was about 1990, new prayer books had come out for use at funerals that included sections on prayers specifically for people who had died by suicide. So uh, the church was able to change on that. And sometimes I run across people that might not be Catholic, they might be from other uh, religious bodies that had some sort of similar history. Just know that at least in the Catholic world, no, your loved one didn't go to hell because they committed suicide. I believe that that God's mercy and God's tender love for us, God's heart goes out more to that person than another because of the level of their suffering, their pain. And I've seen that in the work that I've been given to do. Um, I'll conclude with this. Do you remember if you've ever been to a Catholic wedding? There's or even a Christian wedding of any denomination. One of the readings that's very often used, if there's scriptures at the service, is from St. Paul. He's writing to a church that he founded in Greece, in the town of Corinth. The letter that he wrote to them is called First Corinthians, because he wrote a second letter to them also that's in our New Testament. But in that community, they're beginning to have uh, exciting spiritual phenomenon, um, healings, and people speaking in tongues, glossolalia. Anyway, some of these spiritual gifts look like they're so kind of sexy, attractive, but they sit right alongside more mundane gifts like administration, being able to organize things, teaching. Um, uh, he cautions people that it doesn't matter what gift you manifest, like even the one that this podcast often is involved with, people coming in the night and being able to talk with them after they've died. Wow, wow, wow. Well, he just says it doesn't matter all the spiritual gifts are given for the good of the whole, for everyone. The spiritual gifts are not to be some sort of bauble or some medal of honor pinned on an individual. They're given to the group, and that the individual offers them back to the group in humble service. And he he says um, that without love, any gift being offered is just junk. He says it this way: if I speak with the tongues of angels but don't have love, I am a noisy gong, a booming cymbal. Think of cymbals crashing in your ear, some gong. He's just saying, if you are speaking with tongues of angels, but you're doing it without love in some sort of egocentric way, you're just making a lot of annoying noise. He gets through the end of a long list of traits about love. Love is patient, love is kind, love does not exalt itself or put on airs. Um, and then at the end of that passage, he says, in the end, there are three things that last: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. I think that God is love and that we're surrounded by love. God is everywhere. You and I are somewhere. I'm in a room full of love because God is in this room, because God is everywhere. And every bit of me is in touch with love because I'm immersed in it. Um, I ask people at seminars and things, do you believe there is a God? Is God that you believe in everywhere? How much do you weigh? If God is everywhere, you're somewhere. You are inside God, and so you can say to God and test it out. I would like to feel your presence. I would like to have some assurance of your closeness and love for me. In the end, you try that. And I promised you at the beginning of this podcast that I'd be praying for you. If you want to follow that up, I'll be praying that for that gift to be given to you, to know that you're loved and that you're accompanied in whatever struggle that you might be in. So that's this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. This was B, the Big Band Singer, part 2, Compassionate Response. The next part in this trilogy will be more focused on spiritual practice. I kind of teased a few here in just the last few minutes, but in the next episode, I'll go into more spiritual practices that might help a person move through the grief and caused by suicide, either one's own grief or how to support the person you love that who did, as B said, take things into their own hand. For now, that's it for this version of the Joyful Friar. Hey, Toto, you want to come here? There you go. So for now, God bless you. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.